I'm reviewing the top 10 49ers of 2022. We're only a few months off from 2023 now. Get excited for every NFL season. And what immediately jumps out about the San Francisco 49ers is when looking at that roster last year, that was the deepest roster in the NFL. We felt that way for several years. You go back to 19 when they faced the Chiefs, they lost the Super Bowl. They had the better roster. 21 against the Rams, they lost, yet they had the better roster. This year, or 2022, they lose the Eagles, yet I'm sitting there saying, I believe they had the better roster. They had the better roster than the Chiefs. You can have the best roster in the NFL like they've had. You can have the deepest team. You can have the most well-rounded team when you consider offense and defense. And if you want to throw special teams in there, if you don't have a top 10 quarterback, you're not going to win. You're not going to win the Super Bowl. You may get to the Super Bowl, you may reach the conference title game, but you're not going to win it unless you have a quarterback who is on fire. There are a few exceptions, but they are a very few exceptions. Couple of honorable mentions or getting into the top 10 players that deserve to be mentioned. Dre Greenlaw. He didn't make my top 10, but one of the most improved 49ers that there was. You could always see the talent. You could see the athleticism. He had the skills, but he's had a difficult time staying healthy. Great season from him. Kyle Juszczyk, it's difficult to put a fullback in the top 10, but I don't want to overlook how valuable he is because there's so few fullbacks. I want to say there were 8 according to Pro Football Focus. I could be wrong about that, but it was less than 10 official fullbacks in the NFL. He's either the best or the second best fullback every year. Smart, intelligent, great blocker. You can even use him as an additional tight end. But let's get into this top 10 here. Number 10, I have Deebo Samuel. And he had a letdown year after the season he had in 2021. He didn't come close to his production at all. You look at the statistics here, and his production wasn't even half of what he had, and injuries were a part of it. You can't remember really big games other than the first game against the Rams, and then he had the biggest play of the game for the 49ers against the Seahawks in the wild card round. In 21, he had 77 receptions, 1,400 yards receiving. He averaged 18.2 yards a reception, 6 touchdowns receiving. And then to add to that, 365 yards rushing, 8 touchdowns. To think he was going to repeat that was unrealistic. Looking back at it now. He followed it up in 22 with 632 yards receiving, only 2 receiving touchdowns, 232 yards rushing. Still had average 5.5 yards a carry. I'm expecting a better year from him coming into next season. But I would say somewhere between those 2 years of 21 and 22. And I'm a big fan of his game. Who isn't? Who's a 49ers fan? Because he doesn't shy away from contact. He's tough. He's what you want a football player to be. Yet I do not want to see him carrying the ball often. I want to be sparingly a couple times a game. Why? Because you already have so many running backs. If you want to screen him, fine, do that. But get him in space, and I don't want to see a bunch of defensive tackles fallen on his ankles and knees. Another thing with Deebo Samuel I have to bring up is we've probably seen the best football. Let's be honest. We've seen the best football from him. I don't think he's ever going to have a season like he did in 2021. But hopefully you have a better and more healthy season than last season. And where I had him, and he did take a big fall, where I personally ranked him on the player ratings for 2021, I had him in number 2, behind Trent Williams and even before Nick Bosa. That's how good he was. Number 9, Talanoa Hufanga. One of the most improved players on this roster. He played better than I could have possibly expected. His opening game against the Bears was a heck of a performance. He had an interception. He was flying all over the field, and people were saying, this is the second coming of Troy Polamalu. And you can see why, because of the style of play, the same position of safety, the hair, to mention a few things. He started off so well in the season, and it seemed like he was everywhere. I mean, the play he made, the interception against the Rams to win and put that game away, was my favorite play he made during the season. He was excellent in the first half, but he definitely slowed down in the second half. I mean, he had some great games. He definitely had memorable moments, splashy plays for the highlight reel. I still wonder about his coverage. I mean, he's in the box. It's not just to say he's one of those safeties that has to be in the box. He can play back there in coverage, but he was exposed a few times throughout the season, even including that week 1 game against the Bears. It was a blown coverage by him in one of, I believe it was the big touchdown in week 1. And it was just generally a more quiet second half. He wasn't bad by any means, but he wasn't making nearly as many big plays as we saw in the first half. I'm hoping he can build and continue to improve upon his first year as a starter. Number 8, Charvarius Ward. And I put him ahead of Hufanga because of the position, cornerback. I mean, is there a more difficult position to play in the current modern NFL than cornerback? I don't think so, because all the rules are against you. I mean, is that true for all of defense? Yes, but cornerbacks have such a difficult task because you can't breathe on receivers anymore. And this was a fantastic signing. Like Hufanga, I thought he was better in the first half than the second half. I mean, he had some games, like against the Chiefs, where he didn't have a good day. Though from what I remember, he was rushed back probably too early for that game. He also gave up a big touchdown in the wild card round. DK Metcalf. But again, which cornerbacks never get burnt in the modern NFL? I mean, show me someone who doesn't have a bad couple plays. I remember Greg Papa saying during the season that this was the best cornerback the 49ers had, number 1 corner since Deion Sanders. That's hard to argue with because the 49ers' weaknesses growing up, I started following the 49ers, and I was old enough to understand the game almost immediately after the 94 Super Bowl team. And it seemed like with those mid to late 90s 49ers, the weakness was cornerback. The weakness was cornerback with the Garcia-Mariucci teams. The weakness on the defense for the Harbaugh teams was cornerback. And cornerback has been a problem for so long with the 49ers. And he didn't get a Pro Bowl honors or All-Pro like Hufanga. And again, I like Hufanga. I just don't think he was worthy of an All-Pro. But in my opinion, if you had to pick one or the other, I thought he had the better season. He was more consistent throughout. Number 7, this may be a little controversial here, and it always is when you bring up the position of quarterback. I'm putting Brock Purdy at number 7 because he took the team to another level. It was only a total of 6 regular season games he was in. Of course, he took over for the injured Garoppolo, but he was undefeated. He went 6-0, 5-0 as the starter. He won 2 playoff games, and we'll never know about the Eagles one. I think they would have lost. I've gone back and forth so many times on that. It's always going to be one of the great what ifs. What if? You know, I think those were the best 2 all-around rosters in the NFL last season. It was so disappointing we didn't get to see the game we wanted to see between the 49ers and the Eagles. But he never lost. He never lost as long as he was in there and playing. And for the first time under Shanahan, Purdy was leading this offense. He had a command of this offense, the best I've seen since Jeff Garcia. He immediately won his teammates over, and he had the intangibles. No, he's not going to impress you with his physical size or a rocket arm or running like the wind. No, but he had the intangibles. He had the pocket presence. He could lead the offense. He could see the field, great vision. And they were putting up points. I mean, this was the most complete football team, and that's why it was so disappointing to see this season fall apart as it did in the conference championship game. In my opinion, the best roster and team they had since the 94 team. Better than the Harbaugh teams, better than any of the prior Shanahan teams, better than the Mariucci teams. You have to go back to Seifert. Purdy made a difference and certainly can make the point that, well, this was the best roster in the NFL, and a player at quarterback should do well. Yes, but a rookie and the last pick in the draft. And he looked like an experienced veteran quarterback. And I hope he returns to the player he was. I hope he still will have the arm strength that he did before and give the 49ers the best shot at actually returning the Super Bowl. And let's win it, because I don't want to go back to the Super Bowl and lose more Super Bowls. Number 6. Brandon Ayuk. He went over 1,000 yards, and he's quietly the best receiver on the team. Deebo Samuel, he has the highlight plays. He is one of a kind player, and you love him. But if you're just talking about who's the best receiver on the team, it's Brandon Ayuk. Swiss Army knife, Deebo Samuel. Ayuk is consistent. He's smooth. He's polished. He has great hands. He's a much better route runner. He has better speed, too, than Deebo Samuel. What's hard for Ayuk is there's so many other targets on the team, and this is still, under Shanahan, a team that loves to run the football. So he doesn't get the opportunities that many other receivers have. but he's gotten better. He's gotten a little better every year, and he was good when he entered the league. Number 5, George Kittle. In my opinion, he's the best all-around tight end in football. And there's no argument that Travis Kelce is the best receiving tight end in the NFL. And to me, he's more of a receiver, and that's not to be a slight or a criticism of Kelce. To me, he's more of a receiver than he is a tight end. It's not to say he doesn't block at all. George Kittle is the total package. And it was great to see the chemistry between George Kittle and Brock Purdy. As I scream routinely throughout the season, almost every game, could you get the ball to this dynamic tight end, as good as any tight end in the NFL after the catch? And they finally took advantage of him. He had a career high this year with 11 touchdown receptions. He had 765 yards receiving, and the 49ers always get away from him, which also drives me insane. In the playoffs, get your best players the ball. And the other 2 postseasons, almost went out of their way to ignore Kittle. Well, good things happened when they got him the ball, like against the Cowboys. That was nice to see. Number 4, Fred Warner. What a great draft pick he was. A 3rd-round draft pick. George Kittle was a 5th-round draft pick. But I'm a huge Fred Warner fan. We've had the privilege of seeing great middle linebackers in San Francisco. Patrick Willis, who should go to the Hall of Fame. Before he had the injuries, I don't know how a middle linebacker, could be much better than Patrick Willis. You want to talk about a complete player, and I'll get to Fred Warner in a moment, but for those couple of lean years, 2007, 8, 9, where there wasn't much to feel good about with the 49ers, pre-Harbaugh, you had Patrick Willis on defense. You had Frank Gore on offense, but you had Patrick Willis on defense. And Patrick Willis was such a force. He was the best tackling linebacker in the game. He was sideline to sideline. He could cover. He could rush the quarterback when asked to do it. You want to talk about being everywhere. He was everywhere. And even in that rookie year, I remember when he had the big club because he had the hand injury. I remember him chasing down a receiver in full speed down the field. Get him in the Hall of Fame. It's taken long enough. If he was a Cowboy or Steeler, he'd be in the Hall of Fame already. But he's a 49er, and we don't get the respect we deserve for being a legacy franchise. A team that has one of the great dynasties in the history of the sport. Still, we don't get the respect that the Cowboys and the Steelers get. We'll do a whole nother episode on it. Oh, this Patrick Willis special sometime. But to Fred Warner. Oh, and I have to bring up NaVorro Bowman too. Oh, just the way his career really ended in Seattle in the championship game. I know he came back, but he was not the same player. I mean, who could be after an injury, torn ACL, MCL like he did, at a position like he did? It's just hard to watch. It's hard to go back and watch that game. It's hard to go back and watch that injury because he was playing out of his mind at that time. And Fred Warner is the perfect modern middle linebacker. He's tall, he's lean, but he has enough strength. He's also sideline to sideline. He's as good as it gets in coverage. Not asked to blitz much, but like you need out of that middle linebacker position, you need leadership and you need intelligence right there in the middle of the field, and that's what you have with Fred Warner. And how impressive it was in the divisional round. I'll use this as an example. There was a play where he was covering CeeDee Lamb downfield, and he was running practically stride for stride with him. CeeDee Lamb isn't slow. With the Cowboys' #1 receiver. You want to talk about impressive? He had a disappointing year in 21. I mean, 20 was a phenomenal year, and that's what earned him his big contract. 21 was disappointing. He was not the same guy in 21, but he returned to that elite all-pro level in last season. And it was great to see. He also had the interception in the divisional round against Dak Prescott. I love that. He could be a future Hall of Fame player. I mean, he has to build on what he has. He got off to a little bit of a slower start, but this guy was a solid player the moment he came in the league, and he just steadily improved. Certainly one of my favorite 49ers, and it's difficult being a good middle linebacker because it's a position that isn't valued very much anymore. Because what is it on defense? It's all about getting to the quarterback. And if that's not what you're doing, unless you're one of the very best defensive backs, it's all about a player getting the quarterback, such as Nick Bosa. If you want to talk about a guy who's considered a linebacker, Micah Parsons. There's no comparison to Micah Parsons that you can make with anyone else in the league, but that's what everyone wants, is sack the quarterback. And for Fred Warner to be as valuable as he is really says something about his quality of play, his talent and skill. #3, even though he got traded to the 49ers, he didn't have a full season with the 49ers. I'm going with Christian McCaffrey. I knew McCaffrey was good. I did not know he was this good. When you get to actually see a player up close and see him week in and week out, like McCaffrey, he played in 11 games. He started 10. He had 746 yards rushing, 4.7 yards average on the ground. He had added another 464 yards receiving and a couple of touchdowns. He even threw for a touchdown the Rams. I mean, that performance he had in his first game starting, I mean, he came in with very little time to prepare against the Chiefs. He didn't even start. But when he came in that first week as a starter and he had a week to get ready with the Rams, oh, that was a memorable game. I could still rattle off. He rushed for a touchdown, he had a receiving touchdown, and he also threw for a touchdown. He's all that. He really is. Christian McCaffrey is all that. He has excellent speed. He is, I mean, you could make the argument that he's actually the best receiver on the roster. You think about the best receiving running backs in NFL history, you got to go back to Roger Craig. He was the first 1,000 player. Marshall Faulk was so good. And then you have Christian McCaffrey, who arguably is the best of them all. The best receiving running back of all time. Imagine what he might do this season with having a whole off season to prepare, and you don't know about running backs how long they're going to have, but do everything you can to keep him healthy, keep him fresh. And that's just another reason why it's time to win the Super Bowl. You have to win when you have these players in their primes. And you look at this roster here and all these players I'm going through, they're in their prime years. Number 2, Trent Williams, the best tackle in football. He was number 1 in my rankings in 21. I believe he had the highest rating of a tackle, maybe even of all offensive linemen in the history of Pro Football Focus. You just don't have to worry. You know that he is going to protect the quarterback. And I don't care who you have that's against him. I mean, if you saw the film of him just putting a stop to Micah Parsons and everything that he can do in the divisional round, you want to talk about impressive? Pass blocking, run blocking. He's one of the greatest tackles ever. He's headed to the Canton. He's a lock for the Hall of Fame. It's just kind of a joke. He doesn't have more All-Pros. Not quite as good, I will say, as almost the impossible standard he set in 2021. But you still say, well, who's really better than him? No one. If so, he'd be the second best tackle in the NFL. There's another good reason, because you're not going to get a better tackle. Win now. And then number 1, Nick Bosa. And we could do episodes about Nick Bosa. The moment he stepped on the field, and I say this every time, he was, as a rookie, one of the best defensive players in the NFL. Day 1, week 1 of 2019. He never has played in a preseason game. He doesn't need to. He was groomed and he was trained from a very young age to do one thing, and that was get the quarterback. He and his brother. And what's amazing about him is, I remember Damon Bruce saying this, be happy 49ers, you got the better Bosa. Because Joey Bosa is a heck of a player. Nick Bosa is even better than Joey Bosa. I mean, he won Defensive Player of the Year. Can he get better possibly? Maybe. He had 18.5 sacks to lead the NFL last year. He had the most quarterback hits by far, 48. He's constantly there in the backfield. He's as good as any pass rusher in the NFL. He's very good against the run. The offense's number 1 priority is to deal with him. And for him to have the season he had last year, I think was very impressive, because the rest of the defensive line, people talk about them like they're very good. To me, they were average to good players. He didn't have that player on the other side like they had with Dee Ford in 19. He had some good players like Ebukam and Willis and Amenahu, but they're not great players. Let's be honest, in many ways, those guys are average players. And then you look at Eric Armstead, he's better than his stats show, but Armstead didn't even register a sack in the regular season. He's a big body. He does matter. He does help Bosa, but Bosa was the guy who took the defense in 19 to a Super Bowl level. And there's no mistake that the moment he was with the 49ers, and every season he's been healthy, they're a Super Bowl contender. 19, getting the Super Bowl and losing. 20, well, he missed the whole season. Look what happened. They didn't even sniff the playoffs. 21 championship game, 22 championship game. That is the kind of force that Nick Bosa is. I can point to 3 specific games where Bosa was the closer, where he sealed the victory for the 49ers. And you can do that as an edge rusher. It was the Saints game, the Dolphins game, which was a 3-sack game, his 3rd sack. It was a forced fumble. Greenlaw took it in for a touchdown. And then the Raiders game, where he forced with a pressure an interception that ended it in overtime. He's a top 10 player in the whole NFL. You can argue if you want about who's the best defensive player. There's no doubt he's top 5, he's top 3 over the last 2 years. If you want to just take the last 2 years, he had a heck of a season in 21 as well. He, in fairness, did not have a great playoffs. I wonder if he was hurt, possibly. That would seem to be the explanation. But he's one of the best draft picks the 49ers have ever had. For a number 2 pick, they've blown a lot of first-round picks. The good news is they got that pick right. 49ers, don't squander another season with this amazing collection of talent. It's time to win the Super Bowl.